the quiet birth of financial authority. It did not arrive with elections, armies, or revolutions. There was no moment to remember, no figure to celebrate. Financial authority emerged quietly, almost invisibly, while everyone was watching power elsewhere. To understand why this authority mattered, we must return to a Europe where political rule was loud but unreliable. Kings changed, borders shifted, laws were rewritten with every crisis. Yet trade could not wait for stability. Markets needed decisions every day, not promises of future order. Into that gap stepped something new, authority without spectacle. The first reveal begins with coordination. Merchants, lenders, and insurers began deferring not to rulers, but to procedures that worked. Standards for creditworthiness, accepted practices for settlement, shared assumptions about risk. These rules were not imposed. They were adopted because ignoring them was costly. Compliance became practical long before it became formal. The second beat follows how these practices hardened. What started as custom became expectation. What was expected became required. Access to capital depended on following rules no parliament had written. Those who deviated found themselves excluded, not punished. Financial authority did not need enforcement. It relied on participation. What made this shift powerful was its silence. There were no declarations claiming control, no institutions announcing supremacy. Authority accumulated through repetition, embedded in routines that felt neutral and technical. Decisions were justified as necessary, not chosen. And because they were framed as inevitable, no one asked who benefited. Slowly, power moved, not from palaces to markets, but from visible command to invisible structure. Authority no longer needed to announce itself to exist. It lived in standards, expectations, and systems that decided outcomes before politics could respond. By the time anyone noticed, it was already in place. Financial authority had been born, not through conquest, but through convenience. And once authority becomes convenient, it becomes very hard to remove. As the reveal deepened, this quiet authority began shaping behavior far beyond markets. Governments adjusted policy to remain compatible with financial expectations. Laws were drafted to align with standards already assumed. Even political promises were filtered through what systems would tolerate. Authority no longer opposed politics. It preempted it. The conflict emerged when elected leaders realized decisions were being constrained before debate began. Proposals were evaluated not on merit, but on credibility. Would markets accept it? Would lenders react? Would ratings shift? These questions arrived before public discussion, narrowing options silently. Choice remained, but only within boundaries no one had voted on. The buildup intensified during periods of crisis. Emergency measures were rushed through with minimal scrutiny, justified as unavoidable. Temporary frameworks hardened into permanent authority. Each intervention expanded the scope of what financial systems could expect and demand in the future. What began as response became precedent. Institutions defended this authority as neutral. They claimed to reflect reality, not shape it. But neutrality itself became power. By defining what was realistic, the system decided what was possible. Alternatives were dismissed as irresponsible before they could be tested. Risk was framed as danger rather than opportunity. Over time, even resistance adapted. Activists learned to speak the language of credibility. Reformers framed demands to avoid market reaction. Debate shifted from vision to reassurance. Authority no longer needed to silence dissent. It redirected it. By this stage, financial authority had achieved something remarkable. It governed without appearing to govern. It constrained without commanding. It shaped outcomes while remaining unnamed. And because it lacked a face, it was nearly impossible to confront. The question Europe now faced was subtle but urgent. How do you challenge a power that presents itself as inevitability? The tension reached its peak when the cost of quiet authority became impossible to ignore. Growth slowed where investment was deemed unconvincing. Inequality widened where adjustment fell unevenly. Entire regions were labeled risky and left to stagnate, not through decree, but through algorithmic caution. No one ordered abandonment. It simply happened. The conflict sharpened as policymakers attempted to reclaim space. Some challenged assumptions. Others proposed alternatives outside established frameworks. Each effort met the same response. Markets reacted. Credit tightened. Warnings followed. The message was never explicit, yet always understood. Deviate too far, and consequences would arrive without debate. The buildup intensified when internal reviews surfaced within institutions themselves. Analysts warned that authority exercised without visibility eroded legitimacy. Decisions framed as technical had social consequences they were not designed to absorb. Risk models failed to account for human endurance, political backlash, or long-term cohesion. The system optimized stability until stability itself became fragile. Public awareness grew unevenly. People felt constrained but could not name the source. Elections changed leaders, yet outcomes repeated. Trust thinned not because systems failed outright, but because they never seemed to listen. Authority that could not be addressed began to feel unaccountable. Inside the architecture, cracks formed. Informal exceptions multiplied. Back channels reopened. The more rigid the surface appeared, the more flexibility hid beneath it. Authority remained powerful but inconsistent. Predictability weakened. What had once been invisible now felt arbitrary. By this stage, the quiet birth of financial authority had matured into a dilemma. Power exercised without acknowledgement could not be corrected openly, and power exercised without correction would eventually provoke rejection. Europe now stood at a crossroads. Either financial authority would learn to speak in public terms, or would be challenged by forces far louder than it was prepared to face. The reckoning did not arrive through collapse, but through recognition. Financial authority could no longer pretend it was merely responding to reality. It had been shaping reality all along. And once that truth became visible, silence stopped working as protection. The climax unfolded when institutions began to acknowledge limits they had never publicly named. Reports shifted tone. Language softened. Terms like inevitability and necessity were replaced with assessment and choice. What changed was not the machinery itself, but the admission that it could be questioned. Authority, once hidden behind process, stepped into view. This visibility altered behavior almost immediately. Policymakers demanded clearer assumptions. Citizens asked to set the rules that define credibility. Debates once dismissed as unrealistic gained space, simply because they were finally allowed to exist. The system did not lose power overnight, but it lost its invisibility. And that changed everything. The resolution followed gradually. Oversight expanded. Transparency requirements deepened. Financial authority remained influential, but no longer untouchable. Its decisions were framed as judgments rather than facts of nature. Responsibility returned to places where it could be discussed, challenged, and revised. Not every outcome improved, but accountability did. What endured from this chapter was not rejection of financial systems, but a rebalancing. Europe learned that authority built on convenience must eventually answer to consent. That stability and force without voice creates fragility beneath the surface. And that power exercised quietly is still power, whether it admits it or not. The quiet birth of financial authority did not end in revolt. It ended in awareness. And awareness, once established, cannot be undone. Systems may still constrain. Markets may still react. But inevitability has lost its disguise. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The